A hard man is somebody who's virtuous, who's selfless, who puts other people before themselves, who's willing to risk. What is a weak man? Well, a weak man is a person that complains. They're undisciplined. The victim mantra. There's a sense of entitlement. The beneficiary of all the hard work that has come before, and now they spit on it.
You're a man living in the modern world in a time when men and manhood are not what they once were. You live life on your own terms. You're self-sufficient. You think for yourself, and you march to the beat of your own drum. When life knocks you down, you get back up, because in your gut, you know that's what men do. You're a badass and a warrior, and on the days when you forget, we are here to remind you who you really are.
Do thinks that probably within the next 5 years or maybe even 10, we could be seeing in the United States and in Canada, we could be seeing whether it's civil unrest, civil war, or some kind of like large scale conflict that we get dragged into. I think it's pretty high. And if you look at the quote hard times, when you look at that, that's kind of just a distillation of generational theory. And if you look at generational theory, whether Strauss-Howe, who wrote a book called Generations. There's also some other scholars that have the concept of generational theory. And what that says is that there are, in each generation, around 20, 25 years, it's a cycle of time. And then based on Strauss and Howe's generational theory, and I encourage you guys to look it up, we're in what they call the fourth turning. What that means is we're in the midst of a crisis. And that crisis, the last crisis, when you just rewind the clock, was 1930s and into the 40s. And we all know what happened then. We essentially had, even though I've written apocalyptic books, we had a world war. And then for many people, specifically in Europe and in Asia, it was an apocalyptic event. Because if you look at an apocalyptic event, it's when everything changes. You know, when you had nation states that entered World War II that ceased to exist at the end of that war. And you had millions upon millions of people that were killed. You had 9 million Germans that were killed. You had 26 to 29 million Russians that were killed. We know about the number of Jewish people that were killed. We had around 300 and some thousand Americans that were killed. You had just a completely apocalyptic event that changed the map and it changed the geopolitical landscape. That was the fourth turning. And then we entered into kind of this first turning. That's what happens. The fourth transitions into the first turning. We kind of get this rebirth of things. You get new systems in government and things like that that are in play. Optimism is there. People are working together and coordinated. And so we are, based on Strauss and Howe and my own personal belief, just looking at the world the way it is, we are in this crisis moment that will more than likely end in some kind of a conflict. Again, that could be just a complete overturning of our governmental systems from a capitalistic free market system or a constitutional republic or democracy into something more authoritarian and socialist. And so we also are sitting here in Canada and in the United States where we have two distinct cultures that are vying for power. Okay. You have some political parties, even like in the United States, you have the Democrats, and at certain periods of time, the Democrats, you get Bill Clinton, were still an individual that believed in a free market system, that quasi believed in a democratic constitutional republic. But now you've got elements, the specific are aligned on the hard, far, far left that are communists. They believe in a capitalist system, but completely different view on what they want, and they're vying for power. No time in history, two distinct cultures reside in the same landmass without it eventually coming to conflict. So what I always then ask is if we are heading in that direction, and if you believe that you could be yourself experiencing that, specifically when somebody says, I think there's a lot of normalcy bias that goes around. When you ask people, can something like this occur? Could we find ourselves in the midst of some kind of non-kinetic or kinetic civil war? I go, well, shit, 5 years ago, we had a pandemic that shut down the fucking world for fucking like a year. So to think that we couldn't be faced with somewhere out of nowhere, some kind of an event that we're now struggling economically, everything crashes, there's fighting in the streets. Again, I'm not saying it's going to be like armies marching at each other, blue versus gray kind of situation, but we could be finding ourselves in a situation that could be very violent. And so this is where I always get back to how many people, how many of you would you say that are you prepared? And do you know what preparedness means? And preparedness doesn't mean that I don't believe it means to go out and to be kind of a prepper, so to speak. You're gonna go run to the woods somewhere and wear a cami all the time and just like that's like you're gonna live off grid and that's your life. I think that it's important, and I think this instills confidence in men specifically because we are the providers and protectors of our families. And being prepared for any event gives us that confidence as men. And it also, the women in our lives will look towards us. I remember when COVID occurred, everyone's freaking out, everyone's running around. I just closed the door because I was ready. I'd already been preparing for this kind of crazy stuff for years and years and years and years because I'd written apocalyptic fiction. That's what I do. It's my job. And so I kind of had a feeling that one day this was going to happen, and we none of us knew exactly how it was all going to roll out. Of course, a lot of people that have 2020 hindsight vision say, "Oh, I knew this was this and that was that." But when you're living in the midst of the event, it's very destabilizing. It makes people feel very anxious. And the one thing that takes away from that anxiety, that panic, is to be prepared. And again, not being prepared like, like you see shows, it's kind of toothless guy living in the woods. But just again, it's like having an insurance policy. We all are out there. We're all professionals. We all have insurance. We have car insurance. We have health insurance. We have various umbrella insurance, liability insurance for our businesses, life insurance. Those are all things we have that are sitting there in case we need them. We feel secure. Hey, good. This happens to me. Now I've got this to help me. That's all being prepared is. Okay. Now I'm not here to sell anything. I'm just here to kind of understand what preparedness is and encourage each and every one of you as men that if you're not prepared, that's okay. You can slowly start marching towards that. And it's very, very simple. So I created something years ago when I was speaking a lot more, when I was really in the midst of writing my books, because I've written 40 of them. The last one I wrote, book number 40, was published in January 2023. So it's been a while since I've written an apocalyptic book, but they're definitely ingrained in my brain. I created something called the 4 pillars of survival. All right. And essentially it's very simple. What it breaks down to is resources. This is how you can be prepared as a man to protect yourself and to protect your family. And that is have resources. Okay. And resources, specifically the basic resources, access to water, potable water, food, long storms, like shelf storage kind of food that could sit there and last for 18 months. First aid, medical, medicines, pharmaceutical, kind of stuff. Have that and have supplies of it. Okay. So resources is a very, very critical thing. Also resources of equipment. Okay. Where that if you your house, if you have the equipment that you can do so. And then skill set, skill set's very, very, very key. Do you have some kind of a skill that you can leverage in an environment that you need to leverage that? Right. If you've got anyone who's medical, we got a neuroscientist here, right? So he's probably got some basic medical background. So, there's skill sets, and you'd be surprised at what those are. They can be basic skill sets of just even the concept of knowing how to hunt and knowing how to, dress the animal once you've gotten it. Maybe it's more kind of geared toward horticulture. And you know how to garden, you know how to like harvest your own food. I know these kinds of things sound kind of outlandish to sometimes when I pose this to people. However, the strangest shit happens, and we never know if we could find ourselves in a situation, and maybe there's a grid down scenario that happens, but it only happens for a period of a month or 2 months. Well, I'll tell you this, you turn the lights out on the general population for just a very short period of time, all hell breaks loose. And the reason all hell breaks loose is because people panic. And the reason people panic is because they know they're not prepared. That's where panic comes from. It's a deep-seated emotional state that like, oh shit, I don't know what to do. I'm going to freak out now. I'm going to go over and steal his stuff. I'm going to go act out violently against them because they got something. Becomes a fight for resources. So again, we've got resources, we've got skill sets. If you've got skill sets, or I would encourage you, if there's a skill set that you've always wanted to do, start learning it. The internet's an amazing place to start learning things. It's all free. Elon Musk says, oh my God, you got all this free education that's access that's available for you to go and dive in. I encourage you to develop your skills you already have, and or learn any new skill sets. Okay. Something else. The next thing is a mindset. Mindset's critical. Mindset's how you view the world. The mindset is, are you, and the mindset of, can you handle yourself in a situation like that grows higher and higher once you start making sure that you are prepared. Okay. So have that mindset that you're willing to do what's necessary. And then the last thing I think that often gets overlooked when I've talked to a lot of guys and a lot of people about preparedness is fitness. It's incredibly the one thing that people like. They want to sit on this kind of awkward stool without that leg. And the fact of the matter is men, we should be physically fit. We should have the physicality to be able to handle ourselves if we need to. By the way, also when I saw Dickie in the gym there, right? That's great. That's what we should be doing. We should be working our bodies, because when we work our bodies, we work our muscles. Again, that builds confidence in us as men. And physicality is critical. I'm not saying you have to have six-pack abs. I'm not saying like any of that shit. You need to look like Marky Mark, during back in the day. What I'm saying is that, do you have the stamina? Do you have the conditioning that if something happens, you can weather that and protect your family? Listening to Oregon talk about the concept of how women and emotions, right? One thing my wife told me is when all COVID was happening, because she would sometimes joke with me about all the prepper stuff I was doing. I'd done over the years. That when all that went down, she pulled me aside later, because I got two girls too, and thanked me for doing all that, because she felt safe, she felt secure, while the rest of the world and her friends were all panicking and all this other shit was going on. This is like the first couple of weeks when people are just kind of in this weird state. And even past that, she just felt, she was very grateful that I had been thinking about that. And then she leaned on me because I was there. And again, that's very, very critical. And I appreciate him for mentioning that, because that's absolutely true. There was something that she had also told me that I thought was interesting. I just wanted to bring up is, like, I never realized how much women feel vulnerable when they're not, when they're by themselves. Like, how often when you're like walking around by yourself, are you like, I always encourage people to have situational awareness, head on a swivel. But how often do you actually feel unsafe or vulnerable? Probably not all that often, specifically if you're conditioned and you look strong, no one's really going to fuck with you anyway. But women feel scared all the time. I was shocked when she told me this. She goes, "Oh, you talk to my girl, we feel scared all the time." I was like, really? It was foreign to me to hear that. And to ask them to go, it's like, "Oh, I need you to go become prepared." Well, that's just not going to happen. It's our job as men to provide and to protect our women. And part of that is being prepared. Part of that is having those resources, gathering those skill sets, having the mindset, and then also then having the physicality and fitness to do such a thing. And I think when you do that, your woman is going to look at you completely differently. Now, maybe they might argue with you. Do you really need to buy that? Do you really need to do this? That's just what they do. But I strongly encourage you that as we kind of are adrift at sea and kind of a lot of uncertainty today, we got tariff wars going on, the threat of war, physical war, possibly, that's out there, that you will pat yourself on the back if something happens, and then you from this moment decided you can go back and go, something, I'd listened to what he said, and I kind of hardened my defenses, so to speak, so that because when you have to go look for it during the midst of it, you don't want to do that. You don't want to be in that position at all. You want to go gather the resources now, get the skill sets now, and become physically fit now. Now's the time to start doing that, because you just don't know when, as the balloon goes up, as they say.
So tell us specifically, what types of things do you think men ought to be doing in order to be prepared? Like, specifically, like, talk about go bags, talk about other things like that you've done that you think makes sense.
Yeah, gathering resources is easy. But then, of course, that requires you to have resources, right? So that's always easier. When you have financial resources, you can go and buy a bunch of shit, and that's fun, right? The basics, I think the core elements are this. I would start with the basics, necessities. What do you actually need to actually survive, right? You have to look at, food. You have to look at water. Those are critical, right? There's that thing like you can like live without air for 3 minutes, without water, for 3 days and 3 weeks without food, something like that. And so, I mean, the air is here, so we've got that. So the one thing is to make sure you have access to and or water is very key. And again, that can be difficult. So yeah, what I encourage you is to think. You guys are all smart. You might be living in different, environments. You might be living in apartments or condos. I have no idea what your living situation is, and kind of creating a cachet of that might be difficult. But I would encourage you to think of alternate ways of if something happens. Like, for instance, everyone's got a bathtub. One thing that I've got on top of my water supply is I have these little bladders that I can sit in a tub and I can just fill it. So if we know the power is going to go out, we have no idea it's going to be out for an extended period of time. Well, if power goes out, it's only a matter of time before the water shuts off. That's only a matter of time. You take that out for an extended period of time, all the water stops. If you're living in some kind of suburban, urban environment where you're relying on a municipal area to provide you water, that's going to turn off after a period of time. It is just what it is. So you can just have a bladder. So a situation happens, you throw the bladder in the tub, you fill it up, you've got 60 gallons or whatever of water sitting there. You got water tanks in your house, like a hot water unit. That's physical, not like an Insta-Hot kind of thing. You've got the 60, 80 gallons sitting in that as well. But water is very key. And just gather those kind of basic resources. Once you have those kind of secure, again, also food's very important. Then you can start looking at getting gear, getting bug out bags. Then you have the other kind of resources, which is, firearms, which is knives, those kinds of things. Firearms are a tool, by the way. I know in the United States, it's a little easier, I think, to get a firearm. It's my understanding. I'm not sure. Is it kind of hard in Canada to get a firearm?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's getting much more difficult now in the last few months.
Yeah. And, again, you have to look at, even if you just had a long gun, that's something that, again, what the preparedness is, when you're prepared, when you have everything, if you prepare for kind of that kind of, major event, you're then prepared for everything else. Like the power goes out for 3 weeks, you've got it all because you've prepared for the hardcore event. You've got everything. So if you prepare for that hardcore event, if you have a firearm, the firearm there is just a tool. It serves multiple purposes there to defend you and your stuff, as well as it's there that if you have to harvest game and things like that, that's just like we got something we have to like start getting food outside. But a firearm is just there. You can just get a long gun, you get a standard bolt action rifle, something like that, or a shotgun. Those things are sufficient. Handguns are usually more difficult and more, in certain, countries and states and things like that. But just a long gun, it will suffice, I think. But then skill set, I definitely encourage you guys to go out and if there's something else you wanted to learn, just learn that skill. Just figure that out. Whatever that is, know that. Put that in your little bag of tricks that you know how to do something like that. Mindset, I think you guys are you're already working on that stuff anyway, because you're here in this group right now talking amongst other men, and you're already trying to hone yourself anyway. You're trying to improve your mindset as men. So I applaud you for that. And then fitness, again, I think that's one thing I would start today. If you're not, just get out and start doing it. Just start working your body, move your body. It's very important to do that.
So what would make up the elements of a good bug out bag?
Well, a good bug out bag, if you're like, say, you want to bug out for 3 days to a week, of course, you have some element of food, water. Did you got to have provisions? You have to have provisions in there. You have to also have the means to stay warm. So think about that, whether it's some kind of a blanket or something like that to keep warm and to keep dry. That should be in there, because I'm not sure if you're in the desert, then you might need to you have to have stuff to make sure you keep out of the sun or you stay warm at night. So that's important to have in a bug out bag. The means to make fire. The easiest thing is just to have lighters. I mean, a skill set of knowing how to make a fire from nothing, you can teach yourself that. That's in fact not as hard as you think that it is. But if you keep if you can keep like lighters and matches and that kind of stuff in your bug out bag, that's, I think, very important. Sharp edge knives, things like that, paracord, rope, things like that. You want to tie stuff up. I think I already mentioned keeping not so yourself dry, but also when you do your bug out bag, make sure that is also waterproof. And when you make it waterproof, with inside of it, you put everything kind of into a waterproof bag, the actual bag itself becomes like a flotation device. And so you can literally throw it in a river, throw it in a lake, and just like swim with it. Sometimes I know a lot of guys will keep like an extra pair of clothing in there, like it's like an extra pair of jeans, some shirts, some t-shirts, things like that. Also, then maybe even an extra pair of shoes can be tied to the side of it. Again, so just think, and then something that also doesn't hurt either is just to keep cash in there. Just take a certain amount of cash, just keep it in a bag, just tucked away. Because if you're stuck somewhere, cash is king for a period of time. Because if you have some kind of grid down scenario where there's so much shit going down, it's going to be hard for access. Like you have to think, like our reliance on kind of tech might be gone. So you have to kind of go back to more of that analog stuff. So having a little bit of cash tucked in there is very important too.
So when you speak of cash, Hop, are you thinking like paper money, or are you thinking like silver?
For a period of time, and then eventually when the trust and so again, you can look at a very like limited event or something as regional, and you're just having to deal in that, and that gets beyond. If you go more kind of like the end of the fucking world, then you have to look. Do you have things that are like good for bartering? Exchanging, trading, things like that, where cash will be worthless then, because cash is it's fiat currency anyway. So it's backed by the confidence of, the nation state. If that nation state doesn't exist, then the currency is worthless. It's like toilet paper. Oh, by the way, that's something important too. Keep toilet paper in your bug out bag, because if you're out there somewhere and you got to take a shit, you got to have toilet paper.
That's good advice. Toilet paper. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I'm. So you're thinking cash? Maybe what? $500, $1,000 cash?
Yeah, I mean, as long as it's something that whatever you. I mean, again, I don't know where everyone's situation is. The more that you can spare that's just tucked away. I mean, it's not going anywhere. It's just sitting there. If you have to grab it, you have to use it. It's there. I remember I live in San Diego, and I think it was about when was it? I think it was about 12 years ago. Some guy in Arizona at some relay station for power, like hit the power off. It was some weird accident. And the power went down I think we were out of power here for 24 to 36 hours. There was no power. And so you'd be surprised people were lined up at gas stations. Of course, then but you can't get gas anyway. And they were trying to go to stores, and they were trying to everything's shut down. There's no power at all. And most convenience stores or grocery stores don't have backup Jennies. And so, if you have to buy something, that's where cash comes in. You can just say, I got 20 here, I'll give you that for this. Because again, in those kind of situations where it's more regional or something, it's not going to be widespread. It's not going to be the duration of it's not going to go on forever. Yeah. Then cash still has value, and it'll be able to buy you things you may not need in that moment. And also the concept of the bug out bag is that you're away from your actual home. Yes. Right. So say you carry with you in your car, your truck, wherever, and now you're 50 miles from home, something happens, you've got that to fall back on. And you're in an area where there is no power. Well, now you have some cash you can pull out. You can, again, buy stuff that you might need, because it might take you a couple of days to get home.
Yeah, that makes some good sense. Yeah, so maybe like $500, $1,000. What do you think of also having 10 ounces of silver, or 20 ounces of silver, which is again the equivalent of 500 to 1,000?
Yeah, I don't know if that's absolutely necessary. Again, you're getting into kind of the long game where it's all over. Then you have to look at, those are, and I'll be honest, if we get there, what becomes more valuable than that is food. Food becomes a commodity, those kinds of things, ammunition, firearms. I'm talking in like a serious event where there's no government response. Everything has gone to shit. You're out there. It's a protracted time frame. Then, and by the way, there's, you can look at this from historical. You look at during world wars, especially World War II, and you look at where areas are just devastated, what actually held value. And what becomes valuable is what's the true necessities in life. You can have $1,000 in cash, but the cash is worthless, really. Or get you, a day's worth of food because you need it because you're starving, your family's starving. So when you look at a protracted time, a protracted, event, food becomes a big commodity, even much more so than precious metals and gems, even cash. Ammunition becomes key because unless you have the means to manufacture and do reloads, you're not getting any of that. Firearms become a commodity that you can trade, that kind of stuff. Anything that keeps you alive becomes the commodity, becomes value.
Yeah, so firearms, edged weapons like knives, things like that.
Yeah.
My question is like how much resources to put into local versus global in terms of emergency. Um, because like there's a chance that like Canada goes to shit. It's happened before. You know, like if you were in Hungary in 1955, the right answer was not to bug out. It was to get the fuck out of Hungary before the communists came, right? And so I'm thinking about that. I mean, I just had to sell my farm, so I got to think about local preparedness again. But I'm also, you know, thinking about Argentina as a place to buy property and a place maybe to say, well, that's maybe where I relocate if Canada becomes a problem, which right now sounds ridiculous, but I know my history and I know it's not necessarily that ridiculous. So how much resources do you put into like outside of North America, you know, as you know, a place to go?
By the way, that's a good point. One, I think you always should have the preparedness locally anyway, because you need what you're going to need resources for wherever you are. Right now, if say you're still in Canada and then you also have access, or you've actually acquired land and you have something down in Argentina, then the thing you have to think about, if something comes on suddenly, how are you going to get there? Right. So what does that mean to get there? You know, you could literally drive there. I mean, the both continents are connected, so you physically could get there, but it might take a hell of a long time. You're going through some treacherous areas. You know, that you could sail down there. I mean, it's just you know, that's the question. How do you get there? I mean, are you prepared to just bug out and leave your family behind, or do you take them with you? You know, so what does that look at? You know, if you think that there is some kind of sunset on where you live, specifically to Canadian government turns a certain way, you want to get out, like, are you taking everybody with you? Because then that's going to determine what you get in Argentina anyway, right? Are you going to turn around and get another farm down there? Are you going to have you're going to bring your kids and everyone else down there with you? Like, how does that look?
Yeah, I know this is all stuff that I've thought about. And what I thought that really you need both a local and a global solution. So, because there's various futures that are possible. I mean, if you have a situation which is like a nuclear war or something like that, well, you need a local place to go quickly. Or if there's like a big cyber attack or something like that, which like a big attack on the infrastructure, you're right. You don't have time to get on a plane. You need somewhere safe to go because we're only 9 meals away from anarchy.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm deep on all this shit. I've been a gold bug since 2007, so like I know all about that. And I know, for example, gold is useless in an emergency. I know that now. Unless you have like what I heard is you have some wedding rings are better because then, you know, you're like, oh, I'm pawning my wedding ring for something. As soon as you use a gold coin, then it's like, oh, that guy's got gold. You know, it's actually not that useful. I mean, it's useful for transitioning your wealth through a period of disruption. But if you've got an acute problem, it doesn't really work. You know, silver could work. But what I've read is that the most useful things are things like ammunition and lighters. Lighters are actually very useful. I read one amazing account, which I'll share with the group, of someone who survived through the war in Bosnia. And I don't know if you've seen it. It's really quite gripping, Michael. And he survived by basically learning how to refill lighters. So he would fill up. He had a supply of butane, and he would refill everyone's lighters, and that's what got him through. But he also said if you were unarmed in that period, you're fucked.
Yeah.
Because nobody could go out during the day. If you're going out during the day, a sniper would take you out. You only go out at night. If the other thing he emphasized a lot was he called gray man, which you probably know about, which is how to blend in.
Yeah.
You know, and so you yourself are a gray man, but also if you have a farm, your farm's like a gray man. Basically, it fits into the environment so that you don't arouse any suspicion. So he mentioned like these farms that had like fancy gates at the front. That's where the criminals would hit. The ones that didn't look like there was anything useful there, those are the people that survived.
Yeah, you gotta lay low. It's like that's if you're like if you're the one in your neighborhood, you got the Jenny, you don't keep your lights on at night, right? But it's a good question. Global, and again, a lot of this comes down to resources. Some people have more financial resources now, but so the main thing I would say is local. Like first, start there first, and then you can start to kind of grow out past that. But then there's also comes down, it's like an interesting thing. It's like what is the event that happens? So then that whatever the event is also dictates your response and response time and what do you do. There's some events where you just want to bug in, and there's other events you want to bug out. For instance, like if there's going to be, for instance, say like I'm in San Diego, and there's going to be a protracted grid down scenario, for weeks and weeks and weeks, I'm bugging the hell out. Like instantly, I'm just leaving. I'm grabbing everything. We're getting into the vehicles and we're getting the hell out of here to where the power is on. So that's if like it's a regional event, because like you said, 9 days, like all hell starts breaking loose, and there's literally nothing that government can really do. I mean, they try to go and they do things, but there's looting, there's violence, there's all kinds of things. Specifically, that's very widespread. If it's across like an entire series of states or across a province, and it's going to be, a grid down for an extended period of time, my suggestion is to leave. But then there's other scenarios where you want to bug in. Say it's like a massive bio attack, and maybe you prepared your house that you can just bug in, and then you just stay there and you weather whatever that kind of biological attack is, depending on what it is and where it is. So it's tough, but my first thing would be priority is start with local, then you can build from there.
Yeah, that's good advice. We got another question coming in, but I got a quick question myself. So in Canada right now, there's a threat of the province of Alberta potentially moving towards secession if the federal government doesn't back off on some of its net zero anti-oil and gas policies. If something like that happens, what do you think is the best advice for men like us? Because I think if Alberta secedes, I don't know that Canada has a viable future if that actually happens. Do we move to a province like Alberta? Do we look at some international opportunities like Argentina that Oregon was talking about? What do you think would be the best situation in that scenario? And then Mr. Santinato has a question after that.
Yeah, I can say I'm not the greatest student on some of the politics that's happening in the United States. I kind of just stay away from that stuff. Also, because it's also predictable. And so I can't say that I'm acutely. I mean, I've heard about this movement that's kind of happening, possibly based on the election with Carney. And so, I guess you'd have to really truly ask yourself, what do you feel what do you think, honestly, the federal government would do if they chose to secede? Would they literally go and forcibly stop them from doing so, through force? Let's guess what government does. Government has force. That's why they have the guns and the soldiers and the police. They're the purveyors of force. And so would they go and use force? And then you have to ask yourself, is Alberta prepared to protect its sovereignty? If it declares sovereignty and independence, are they then willing to protect that through force? Now you've got yourself this armed conflict, right? And then does that have the ability to spiral out of control? You have to ask yourself that. So, I mean, of the Canadians here, do you think that's one? Do you think Alberta could potentially leave? And if so, do you think the federal government would do anything about it?
They would be very ineffectual, and I don't think they'd do much about it. Canada is strange among most civilized nations is in that it actually gives provinces a pathway for secession.
Then I would almost look at, do you think that could Alberta, with some kind of a trade pact with Canada and with the United States, could it be a viable independent nation or republic?
100%.
Then if it could, then, I think it might be attractive to move there, because I think there could be lots of upside to it potentially, because if it's a natural resource rich province, correct? That's the
It
thing,
is the
right?
richest it is the economic engine of Canada.
Yeah. And again, but I don't see why would Canada let that go? I mean, unless they would just say, we'll let you go, but then we'll just trade with you. They'll create a trade agreement with them for natural resources.
The Premier of Alberta is Canada's version of the Iron Lady. She's Canada's Iron Lady, like Maggie Thatcher back in the 80s. And as you saw, perhaps if you looked at the Carney-Trump press conference yesterday, well, Mark Carney's a pussy. So I don't think he's got what it takes to keep Alberta if it comes to that. I'm not saying it will come to that. I'm just saying that if it does come to that, that could be one of these types of scenarios where we all should pay close attention.
And by the way, so that is an unforeseen situation, right? I mean, people have talked about it here and there, but now you had an election that now has prompted people to really seriously take that under consideration. This is the importance of having the insurance policy of being prepared. So if you're prepared, then you have the peace of mind and okay, like something might light off over there or something might happen, that if you have that peace of mind, then you're sitting pretty. You can already have you can already be thinking of those things. So that's why it's critical, I believe, to have that insurance policy, to always be prepared, to have just at least the resources, at least some skill sets, and have the physicality to be able to deal with something if that were to happen. Now, maybe nothing comes from that, but maybe that's the test run for you to become prepared. And then something happens in 3 years from now. But now you're ready, and you're going to be sitting there thanking yourself that you did that, and you'll have absolute peace of mind. I guarantee it.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. Santinetto, you had a question.
Yeah, my question is a little simpler, a little lighter hearted, maybe. I'm really curious about the moment where you had that realization of those 4 stanzas and what brought you to that realization and how you created it in that moment and kind of that process, if you will.
Well, like I said, there are similar kind of quotes and things like that exist out there. And then I was in the midst of doing research for my books over the years. So I was really into generational theory. And I was reading, again, like Generations by Strauss and Howe and things like that, and really diving into it. And I was really into it. I wrote my first book in 2013, The End. So I was really part of like a lot of survival and prepper groups, because that was like a means for me they were like an avatar for marketing and sales, to be quite honest. But at the same time, when I was writing the book, I also got very prepared. And so then I became really connected with a lot of survivalist group, other survivalist authors and things like that. So I was doing lots of reading. So I was already communicating that sentiment already. That sentiment was already alive. And I was already putting it out there on social media and things like that. And then there was the opportunity in the seventh book of my series that literally I wanted to like use that and then have that as a means for the main protagonist is talking to his grandson, and then really drive that hard and put that in there. Like I've always said, the sentiment has always been there. It's timeless sentiment of generations. And so I'm not like the originator of the sentiment. I wrote those words, but there are similar things that are out there. There's people that have similar kind of concepts where words are moved around, but that's the one that's really taken hold of the kind of the current zeitgeist. It sat out there for the longest time. And it was in 2020, I think it was Donald Trump Jr. took that, and then my name was attached to that, and it just went off. And so it's literally become, it's been the quote that has launched 1,000 death threats. I was telling Baloo this.
Yeah.
Like after 2020, holy shit! Like I had an incredible number of people that like hated me for that. Like attached me to white nationalism, white supremacy, fascism, Nazis. Like I was contacted, I think it was Axios. There was a reporter from Axios that reached out to me and asked me, it's just like these loaded questions you get from the media. Like, how do you feel that this white nationalist movement is using this, using your words? Okay, oh yeah, I'm a part of some white nationalist movement. And I told them to use that. And sometimes I've actually distanced myself from it, because you go on Reddit, it's a fucking firestorm on Reddit of literally death threats. Like someone should kill this guy. This guy's a fucking Nazi. But then I have the opposite, I get people like, this is really cool. I love this, blah, 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 inspiration. This is like, and it's an interesting, it's like a love-hate kind of thing with it. But yes, it's the quote that's launched 1,000 death threats. And it's amazing to when you look at people. I know they're the weak man when they're raising their hand. Also sexist. That was also sexist because I referenced men. And I was trying to like, well, well, in the book, it is a man, a grandfather talking to his grandson. But at the same time, man could also represent mankind. And you understand what that means. And so, yes, they're going to be hard women. And what is hard? What does that mean? It's not necessarily the concept that's being physically like hard with, six-pack abs. It isn't. I mean, while that is very important, I think we're talking about physicality. I think it is very important. At the same time, I think you have to understand what defines a hard man. And when I was looking at it, because I was writing all the books, a hard man is somebody who's virtuous, who's selfless, who puts other people before themselves, who's willing to risk. When you look at the greatest generation, those were hard men, right? And what their sacrifice led to good times. You look at the greatest generation in fighting Nazism, fighting Imperial Japan, and all that stuff. They put everything on the line. Some of them didn't come back. Those are the hard men, the virtuous men. And I think it comes down to that. They're virtuous. They're selfless. They keep themselves educated. They're polite. They're kind. Those are the people that make for good times. They make for a good society. They form good societies. They're the ones that have created our republics, our democracies, the rule of law. You can really expand it out, and all of you are hard men because you all are in the pursuit of being better. Again, attaching virtue to that. What does that mean? You might have your own variations of it, but yet you're virtuous, and you believe in the concept of men being providers, being protectors, and then doing the things that are necessary to protect, not just yourself, but your loved ones, your community, your country. I hope that answered. It's kind of all over the place, but that's awesome. It's a encouraging theory, and we kind of look at Strauss and Hound as the four turnings. And then when you take it, you layer it on that, you take the quote and you layer that there, it makes all the sense in the world. Right now, we're in weak men create hard times. That's where we are right now. We're in a crisis. And how did we get here? Yeah. What is a weak man? Well, a weak man is a person that complains. They are slovenly. They're undisciplined. They believe in the victim mantra. There's a sense of entitlement that they think, even though they've never done anything that actually would give them anything. They're the ones that have been the people, the beneficiary of all the hard work that has come before, and now they spit on it. These are the people that will sit in a Starbucks sipping a latte while on a smartphone blasting somebody on Instagram or Facebook complaining about capitalism, using that is, and without any concept or awareness of how all those things around them came to be. They've lost a grip on historical context, on contextually what it took and the hard labor and the sacrifice it took so they can have all those things, all the infrastructure, the systems in place and things like that. And they're so willing to burn it to the ground. They want to trash it. They're the destroyers of the world. In relation to the hard men are the builders and the creators, right? Amen. So, I'd always encourage you, be the hard man, be the virtuous one, be the disciplined one, be the one that's kind and generous, be the creator, the builder. Then you, with that, you leave a legacy. And we are the beneficiaries of those generations, 3 generations before that built all this for us. And now we're in the midst of crisis. Fighting against, right now we have a culture war. We've been doing that for a long time. And that culture war is going to get hot. It's a matter of time. It's going to get hot. It's inescapable.
There's a Canadian man, I don't know if you know it, but he used your quote, the first line, to create a brilliant book.
Yeah, and unfortunately he passed away.
Yeah.
Stefan Aarnio, yeah.
Yeah.
Hard Times Create Strong Men is
Yeah, I reached out. Yeah, he and I had lots of conversations. It was really cool. He was a great guy.
That's how I
Yeah.
got connected with
Yeah, that's how we got connected. We got connected, and he and I would spend time talking. He had his podcast with his gong. He's gonging away with his old gong.
He was awesome.
But he was a good guy. He was a good man. And what I loved about him is the dignity he had. He had cancer, and he took it all away. He wasn't a quitter. He did everything he thought he tried everything. And unfortunately, God had other plans for him, but he never quit. I respect that.
Yeah, he was a great man. And I'm glad that because of him, I got to meet you. God bless you. I'll reach out to you in the next couple of days. We got to reschedule a couple meetings to talk about a couple of things. Thank you for coming on. Really great to have you here.
It was great to be here. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Sovereign Man Podcast. If you're ready to take charge of your life and become the man you've always wanted to be, we invite you to join the movement at sovereignman.ca.